Welcome to the Earthworks Podcast, where our team will share the jargon of carbon from many of our turf friends from the past 30 years.
Welcome, everybody, to the Earthworks Podcast. I am Joel Simmons, and I am very excited to have an old friend, not an old friend, but a friend who has been a friend for a very long time.
I know, I feel pretty old today, Joel.
We all feel old. Mr. Dave Wilber, and Dave, thank you so much for joining us. We were talking the other day, and I will apologize to you again, but I had forgotten exactly how we'd met. But you had informed me that we had met through an old student of mine that was working at the Boulders in Arizona. And my earliest memories of you have been when we got together in Arizona, and we were talking. Kevin Hicks and I were talking the other day about you in this podcast, and everybody was excited. And I think we all agreed that of all names in the industry that we have dropped in all of the podcasts, and now we've got dozens of podcasts in the can. Of all the names that we've dropped, your name has been dropped on the Earthworks podcast more than anybody. And as you know,
I guess I've heard that a few times. I listen. Yeah,
absolutely. And I'm a little intimidated because you have a much better voice than I have, and you've been doing the podcasting for Peter McCormick at TurfNet for a while, and it's been wonderful. And you are the consummate professional on this, and I need to thank you up front because of over all of these years of all the mentors I've had, probably next to Jerry Bernetti, you've probably been the most influential to me agronomically, and we have shared some great times, and you have absolutely directed me in the right places, and more importantly, you have comforted me through some of the hard times of base saturation and all that kind of stuff.
I think we've both comforted each other a few times in that whole deal, haven't we?
So how are you? You were now in Denver. Everything, and I love the bear. By the way, if you're not watching this live, Dave has a bear poster behind him, or a piece of art, which is spectacular. Yeah. I assume those are your glasses that he's wearing.
Sure. Why not?
Yeah, there you go.
It's funny. I've been producing some stuff around that whole theme, and all I do is I've had to hire a couple of artists, illustrator types, and I just send them exactly what you're seeing right now and say, this is where we're headed. And they love it, and they just run with it. So I'm starting to get all these pictures of bears with glasses.
Oh, there you
go. I have a space bear, I have a Russian bear, and it's all pretty humorous. It's getting to be a thing. So, you
don't happen to have a pet bear at the house by any chance?
I don't have a pet bear. I have a nice pit bull, and
there you go.
Yeah, he's kind of he's thick like a bear,
So we're going to talk a little bit about you and me because there's a lot of things to talk about. But let's start by talking about Dave Wilber a little bit. I know you've got a storied career. You came up quite a bit recently when we interviewed Mr. Kozar.
Yeah, I heard all that.
Kozak and I talked about you a lot, and obviously I met Dave. I met him, Mike, through you. I remember. I think I even talked about, if you remember, we had lunch with him the last time up in California, and he had a chance to tell us all about his China trip, and that was impressive to me. I mean, I brought that up, but but you obviously go way back. I mean, we talked a lot about you in that podcast. So we got a little of the Dave Wilber story, and that he basically found you as a kid in high school and brought you into the industry. But let's hear it from you.
Well, I think the thing, and again, not to say the same stuff that Mike said or whatever, but I lived in a small town in the mountains of Colorado. My father was a chef by profession. In the early part of, up until I was about 11 years old, we had a restaurant in this small town of about 2,500 people. My dad was a classically trained chef.
Really?
And what happened is, way before I was born, my parents met some people who owned a ski lodge in Winter Park, Colorado, and they came. My dad was the chef. My mom was the head housekeeper. These people knew my father from a very fancy steakhouse that he cooked at in Southern California, and they offered him a lot of money to come for a winter and do food at their at their ski lodge.
Wow.
And my parents fell in love with Colorado, and stayed. So that was, and then a few years later, they bought a restaurant. And so I grew up, in the restaurant environment. We lived in a little apartment above the restaurant, like
I did not know that. That's
in a
interesting.
flat. Yeah, it was cool. And so I literally could walk down a flight of stairs right into the kitchen. And my dad I have memories of being in like a high chair while my dad was making dough in the morning.
Oh, that's funny.
And stuff. I hung out at the restaurant. So we had that going on. And then the other thing is my father was it was a ranching type area, a ton of Timothy hay and a lot of grass-fed cattle. It was great summer range cattle kind of place, right? And so dad really one of his things is he wanted to butcher and sell his own beef at the restaurant. And then later when he was doing food for kind of a high-end guest ranch, they had the same idea, right? They wanted to raise their own beef.
Yeah.
My dad got really into it. He got into the whole, grass-fed, no chemical, kind of thing. He was really well-versed actually in animal stuff, because he knew the difference. He knew what a good animal was by the way his knife went through the meat.
Oh, that's interesting. What year is this, Dave? What year are you looking up?
1970, 72.
So he's talking about grass-fed beef in the early 70s before it was ever on the radar for.
Well, that's what everybody did in that area. People brought animals to the high country to graze on the grasses and the cool stuff that was there. And then other people raised Timothy hay that went that area was very, very well respected, like in the racehorse community and stuff. And the hay that came out of those farms, out of those ranches, I should say, went as a specific kind of horse feed and stuff. So everybody spoke that language, Joel. It was like all my friends were either skiers or ranchers or both, and I mean, that's kind of how we all grew up. And it was, 4-H and FFA and I tell people we didn't really, we didn't have Little League Baseball. We had Little Britches Rodeo. That's what went on in that.
So the rodeo stuff that we talked with Mike about was real. You were a cowboy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I never knew that about Dave Wilber. I never knew that.
Yeah, I didn't.
That was part of your life.
It's funny because I didn't really necessarily fit into that because my parents were not ranchers. They didn't have a few thousand acres and a bunch of BLM lease, and we weren't, but my dad was very involved with some people who were, raising cattle and stuff. And I worked the ranch thing, I worked on that ranch when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
So I worked in the restaurant, and then I worked on the ranch, and then I worked at the Dude Ranch when dad was doing food there. I spent my summers at a guest ranch where people came and rode horses and learned about, all that sort of stuff. And it was wonderful. It was filled with tourist girls from Chicago who
perfect
thought cowboy kids were really special.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Who doesn't love a cowboy, right?
At a certain point, I was like, I don't know about this whole thing. I was like, one of the things that I had done the summer before I worked for Kozak is I did a month at a cow camp, like in the high country, like 40 miles from anything.
Yeah.
And stayed in a kind of a bunkhouse kind of thing and managed a huge herd of cattle with a couple of cowboys. And it just wasn't that much fun for me.
Yeah.
It's like I call it a camping trip for work kind of thing. And I just was like, I was lukewarm on that scene, and that was offered to me for the next summer, and I just didn't really feel like that's what I wanted to do. And I had a driver's license and a girlfriend, or I was just getting my driver's license. And so Mike Kozak puts up this notice,
Right.
Kind of laborers needed for Polk Creek Golf Course. And I knew about the golf courses being built, and it was relatively it was a kind of a big deal. There were a lot of people that didn't like the fact that they were building a golf course on this pretty nice piece of ground that used to be cattle country. And it was controversial,
Yeah, I bet.
And so the one thing for sure is I was never encouraged to work in the kitchen. My dad wanted me out of the kitchen.
Really?
Which is just,
Much like many superintendents want their
which is
sons
just,
out of
you know
off the
what?
golf course.
Looking back, it's a shame. And later in his life, he and I talked about that. And he just wanted a better life for me than he had. He
Yeah.
considered it to be very, very hard work and very kind of unappealing.
Yeah, you know, as long as I've known you, I mean, you and I are both foodies, and
Food,
you're
yeah,
one of
yeah.
the better foodies that I know. We spend a lot of time dining, and we've spent a lot of time talking about
Talking about
cooking,
food, yeah.
because we're both cooks. But you know, if I didn't know you as an agronomist, I would have thought, man, your path is clearly in the kitchen. I mean, you would have been. I could see your passion for it. I can see, you know,
Yeah.
I could see you being very successful as a restaurateur or as
Well, I mean, you know,
especially in this day and age with the, you know, modern chefs and the, you know, food networks, and, you know, that would have been right up your alley.
I actually, it was a shame that this opportunity came up about 10 years later than it should have. I had an opportunity to buy a restaurant in that community
Where your dad was.
in Winter Park, Colorado.
Yeah.
Some people that we knew were selling a restaurant, and you know, I had a little bit of money, and I was thinking, well, maybe I don't want to do, you know, golf course turf. And I called my dad and I said, you know, hey, what do you think about buying this restaurant? You know, and will you be my coach? Right. And he's like, no, man, I'm retired from all that. And I said, well, I don't need you to cook. I just, you know, I want to own this thing.
Yeah.
And he, that's so funny. He says to me, he says, listen, you can't handle that, you know? And I'm like 35, 36 at that time, you know, maybe, Joel.
Yeah.
And I'd handled a lot of shit, right? And I'm like, what are you talking about, Dad? We had a kind of, you know, we had a great relationship, but it was a rough relationship. He was a hardcore old Vermonter, you know, and he just said things how he said it. And it, you know, and he had that nasty chef's temper that, you know, that everybody talks about, you know, that Gordon Ramsay has made famous.
Gordon Ramsay, yeah, right,
you know,
exactly.
And he's like, you can't handle the physical plant of the whole thing. You know, you wouldn't know if a mixer was breaking down or not, you know, that kind of stuff. It's like,
I don't know about that.
And he goes, you just sound like one of those people who can cook a little bit, who think they want to be in the restaurant business. It's stupid. Right. So the reason I'm telling this story is the parallel is, you know, think about all these country club members that have nice lawns.
Yeah.
Right. And they think, hey, you know, my lawn's pretty good. Fuck is wrong with your golf course?
Yeah. This is easy, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. And that's what Dad said. You know, everybody who's ever eaten a steak thinks that they can sell one, thinks that, you know, they can't
cook one better than I can.
How that works.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
You cook it home for yourself. You're not worried about time. You're not worried about profit, you know, all that sort of stuff. Right. So he was like, no, you should have learned that way back when. And I said, well, you threw me out of the kitchen. You didn't want me in the kitchen.
Yeah.
You know? And he's like, well, you don't want to start this now. You'll lose your ass. And that was it. That was the end of that conversation. He's like, no, I'm not getting in the restaurant business with you. I'm not going to be your advisor.
Wow.
I was startled.
And that didn't inspire you to just say, forget it, Dad, I'm doing it anyway?
There was a moment of
I could see you doing that, knowing you.
There was a moment of that, but I had a conversation with my mom, and I'm like, you know, and she said, well, you know, if you get involved in that, he won't stay away.
Yeah.
You know, and he wants to be retired. He wants to, you know, he wants to chill.
You know, it's funny how fathers do that. My father was the same way. My father was, as you know, was in television production his whole life.
Right.
And I had started to go down that road as a high school kid. And the only piece of advice I think I ever took from my dad was he sat me down and said, you know, this is one of the most corrupt businesses you can get into. And I had enough experience in the business. I was doing some local DJing and some other things. And you know, it just popped. And I realized, wow, Dad's right. I mean, I saw his life, you know, and much like I'm sure you saw your dad's life, I saw my dad go through some tough times. You know, it's a young man's business. You know, he gets to a point, you know, certainly younger than I am now, where it all kind of came crashing down, and he had a tough, you know, life in his later years. So I think my motivation my whole life is just not having to, you know, be unemployed in it.
Well, I came along a little later in my dad's life, you know, like he was 44 when I was born.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So when they sold the restaurant when I was like 11 or 12, and he went to work doing summertime food and hunting camp food for the guest ranch,
Yeah.
you know. My dad's life was up at 3:30,
Yeah.
making bread, making baked goods, right? Feeding the staff and a maximum amount of guests of, like, there was the max guests I think at that place was 65, right?
Yeah.
And there was like 30 staff, right? So he had 100 people to do breakfast for, and then he prepped lunch. He had a couple people working with him. They would prep lunch, and then he would go take a little nap, and they would do lunchtime, and then he would go take another nap. They would prep dinner and do a dinner thing,
And then clean up and go to bed.
and that was 7 days a week, Joel.
Yeah.
I mean, and he never, my father never ever complained once about the hours or the work,
Yeah.
But I think,
well, that parallels an industry we know well, doesn't it?
right, exactly. So those were the things that I got taught,
Yeah.
long days and all. So anyway, I mean, fast forward to the Kozak thing. It was like Kozak puts up this thing, and I thought, geez, the golf course is close. Like, literally, I could ride my motorcycle through the woods,
Really? That's cool.
to get to the golf course. Like, honest to God, right?
Yeah.
And I thought, this is cool. It's close, and I don't know anything about this, but it's outside. It's all the stuff I can do. And
it's a
so
job.
I meet Kozak that day, and I thought, this guy's pretty cool. And the thing is, what he didn't know is I already knew him because he was working at Winter Park Ski Area. And a lot of us, to get our ski pass, we worked on the what they called the grounds crew.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we mostly, what the grounds crew did is help to park like direct traffic and park cars. And so you could go to the ski area for a couple hours in the morning and park cars and then go skiing. And that's how we all got our ski passes. And we worked for this guy.
So you could have ski privileges.
So you could go skiing. And we had 4-day school week, so we could ski on Mondays when all the tourists and all the people from Denver were there. So, so that was a very big part of our life there. So I knew Mike Kozak because he was an operator. He was running a snowplow and what they call a snow blast, is like a big ass snowblower. He was working with those guys. So I knew that guy. You know what I'm saying? Like he was, and like,
you didn't know that when you went to interview that first time.
When I walked in,
you realized it was Mike.
There's that guy, right? And I'm like, oh, okay, he works at the ski area. And everybody said he was a really, really good dude, that he was the golf course guy, and he was he was working in the ski area that winter. That's the part he kind of left out, is he when he says he worked by himself that first summer, that's exactly what he did. Yeah. That guy grew in 9 holes all by himself.
That's amazing, to be honest with you.
And they had shit for equipment. They had nothing, Joel. Yeah. He didn't even have a front end loader, nothing. If you had to, and even the summer that I worked there, if we wanted to top dress greens, we shoveled sand from the pile into the back of this old state highway pickup that probably had 300,000 miles on it.
Really?
Like this orange Dodge pickup, with the 3 on the tree thing.
Yeah.
Shovel sand into the pickup, and then out of the pickup into a walk behind top dresser and top dress greens.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a massive thing, 3 of us.
I bet.
Take us all day to top dress 9 greens,
Wow. That's amazing.
And I didn't know any better, right?
What year is this, Dave?
1981.
Okay. So early on.
Yeah. And so I'm like, I just thought the work was cool. I thought this guy was cool, and I got to work outside. I wasn't getting stomped on by any animals. I wasn't,
right.
Any of that kind of stuff. And I thought, this is really great. We had all this cool, equipment, mowers and stuff. I could run anything. I could run whatever they had. I had been driving a tractor since I was 9.
Yeah.
Like Mike said, I knew how to weld. I knew how to
that
work
was a great story. Yeah.
And he's like, you can do that? Yeah, I can do that. That, right? It was like that kind of deal. And there were only a few of us.
Yeah.
It was Mike, an assistant superintendent, and like 3 other guys.
Doing the whole property.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, and we opened 9 holes that summer with a crew of like 6, I think. And we were growing in the other 9 holes.
Oh, you were working on the construction of that as well.
Yeah, we were doing the grow in. We started planting grass, and you got to understand Winter Park, Colorado, growing season like this. With the first summer that Mike grew grass there, they had 11 frost-free days. This is at 8,800 feet.
Wait, the whole year?
11 days where there wasn't frost.
The whole year there was 11 days.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So
I
that's
never even
essentially
would have
an
dreamt of
11
that.
an 11-day growing season.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's amazing.
The summer that I worked, the second summer that I worked there, which would have been the 82, 83 summer or whatever, it snowed every month that year.
Really?
Yeah.
So you were that high that you were getting snow in July and August.
July and August.
That's unreal.
I mean, obviously in the summertime it would go away. But it's like,
did you have a lot of golfers?
Yeah, people love the place. Golf Digest named that golf course the #1 new public course in the nation.
Really?
The place was fantastic.
In what, 82, 83?
82. It won that award in 82, 83. Yeah.
And it was half of it was built by one man, and the other half was built by a tiny little crew.
On donated land.
Yeah.
With a rec district kind of deal, with no money. I mean, it was miraculous. We look back now, and I mean, Joel, we didn't have a shop. We had a 36-inch culvert that we rolled our greens mowers into.
Wow, that's unbelievable. With that kind of weather.
We kept our tools in the little pump house. I didn't know better. Eventually, they built a small shop building. It wasn't, by today's standards, it's nothing. And the place is still fantastic. Craig Cahalan is the golf course superintendent there. He's a second-generation superintendent. His father was good friends with Mike and all of us. He was a mentor of mine in Denver.
Wow.
And, it's a fantastic place.
So where'd you go from there?
Well, Mike and I were having a conversation one day about what I was going to do with my life, and you got to understand that Mike Kozak, other than my parents and maybe some teachers, this guy's really kind of in a way a bit of a father figure, uncle figure, maybe really. So anything that Kozak said was that was God speaking, right? Wilber, you got to do this. Wilber, you got to do that. So like, I remember one day I used to cut the sleeves off my t-shirts, so I could get a better suntan and not a farmer's tan.
Right.
And he walks up to me one day. This is when I was working on the crew, and he says, "Wilber, you gotta stop cutting the sleeves off your t-shirts, and you gotta get some shirts with collars on them.
Golf shirts.
I didn't own a shirt with a collar.
Right.
I had to
do you now? Do you have any shirts with collars now?
Yeah,
I think mostly I see you dressed like
that. I do. Well, I mean, today I'm like,
I'm kidding.
Yes, of course. I have all that. I mean, I know the uniform now,
Of course you do.
But Wilber, and the guys on the crew were calling me Iggy Pop and stuff, because
great. That's a good name.
Yeah, Wilber, you gotta stop cutting the sleeves off your shirt. Okay. And I was pissed because then I had the farmer's tan going.
Right. Did you actually put on a collared shirt?
I did.
Did they have they do now? Did you get the club's logo shirt?
Oh, I went to fucking Kmart and
exactly
shirts.
Exactly.
I had to go to Denver, 2.5 hours away and
just to get a shirt with a collar on.
Yeah. But anyway, Mike was he was an influential voice in my life.
Yeah.
And so he's like, "What are you going to do with your life?" And so what was happening is, I'm not a dumb guy, right? And I had taken all the tests that you kind of take, I was taking the ACT test and I took whatever the armed forces, what do they call that? The ASVAB test or whatever.
Something like that. Yeah.
And I guess I blew the thing out of the water. And my school counselor walks up to me and he says, "Hey, there's an opportunity for like an ROTC scholarship or whatever, and it's an engineering kind of thing at the University of Colorado. And there's a test that you got to take for that. And there's a couple of you guys that scored really, really well on this other thing, and they'd like you to take this next series of tests. Do you want to do that?" Right. And he proctored the test, and my friend Judd and I took this next test, and it was full of math and geometry and stuff like that, and I loved all that stuff, right? It was like, oh, it was cool, and my ADD brain had absorbed bits and pieces of all kinds of stuff, and so I did really well on that, and I was offered an ROTC scholarship from the Navy.
I didn't know this either.
The
I've known
idea
you for years.
the idea was that was the entrance to the Navy Nuke Sciences program.
Wow.
And I would have had to go to the University of Colorado, do the ROTC thing,
Yeah.
get an engineering degree,
Yeah.
and be part of the nuke sciences deal. And
So I take it Judd is now a retired 4-star general. Is that
Judd
the story here?
He didn't pass the second test at all.
Okay, so
I was the one that got the offer.
Yeah.
And so I told Mike about all this, and I said, I don't even know. Like, I don't, that doesn't sound fun to me in the military and all that sort of stuff. My dad was ex-Navy, and he just sneered at, at the Navy, right? He was like, I don't know about that. And so Mike said, well, he said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to see the world. I grew up in a small town in Colorado, and all I did was read National Geographic magazine and think about, the world.
Yeah.
And he said, well, if you want to see the world, golf is the way to do that.
Really?
You can't go anywhere in the world there's not a golf course.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
It's true.
And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And then he says, and if you got a greenkeeping degree or a turfgrass degree, you write your own ticket.
There you go.
And I didn't know there was such a thing. And he said, he says, and so as it turned out, Dr. Butler, Jackie Butler, who was the head of the turf program at Colorado State, was coming to see Pole Creek Golf Course. And he said, I'll introduce you to Dr. Butler.
Oh, what timing?
And you can talk to him. So Jackie Butler shows up. He kind of looks around at the grass a little bit, and then he was an avid fisherman, Joel. And what he really wanted to do was fish Pole Creek. He wanted to get his fly rod out and go fishing. In fact, we have a picture of him. He took a fish and put it on one of our bent grass greens and took a picture. Why, we don't even know, but it's like
fertilizer.
As it turns out, he did that all over. He was a character. Jackie Butler was a character, and people who are a little bit older listening to this, I mean, he at one time Colorado State had some pretty amazing, and it still does. Tony Koski is the new guy there, and it's a good program, right? It's not talked about as much as Penn State and all that sort of stuff, But anyway, Dr. Butler, Mike introduced me to Dr. Butler, and you can get a turfgrass degree and all this stuff. So it was like, oh, okay, it's pretty cool. I could do this, right? I could be a golf course superintendent. And Mike handed me the GCSA magazine, and I read through it. And I'm like, wow, this is great. This is a whole profession. And that's where I went from there. So I actually did 2 years of school at a junior college because I got a scholarship offer to because of my 4-H background and all that sort of stuff. It was more ag oriented. So I got my 2-year degree in turfgrass, and then I took classes at Colorado State and finished up at Colorado State. That's how I did it.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, it was like I worked for Mike. Right. And then he took another job and called and said, you want to come to Southern Colorado and do this thing? And he talked about it at Grandote Golf Club with Morris and Weiskopf. And it was another Kozak operation. There are 4 of us down there going in a golf course.
Is that his reputation? That everything he does is on the short?
Yeah. And the thing is, those guys were, they were slicksters. I mean, there was typical developer bullshit, and they're serving peel and eat shrimp every Friday. And then we laughed about it because the progression was like Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Right. And then leftovers.
Yeah. And then they're
soup in a can.
And they're not paying for anything and repossessing our equipment and stuff. And that, they're talking about repossessing the pump station,
The pump station? The one in the ground?
Yeah, they wanted to come get it because it's on skids, you disconnect.
Oh, you just pick it out. Yeah, you could take it out, I guess. Yeah.
So it's like, Mike says, you got to get out of here. This place is going under, and I've got another offer, but I can't talk about it. And that was his Arizona deal.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that next winter, I went back to Winter Park, Colorado, and groomed ski trails. A friend of ours was the head of the grooming crew there. And I spent a winter running a snowcat, and then I worked at Pole Creek in the shop. So the guy who was the superintendent there, who had been Mike's assistant before that, hired me to work that winter. And so I would go in and paint golf carts after I ran a snowcat all night.
Wow.
And I was looking for a job.
Yeah.
So I eventually got an assistant superintendent's job in Denver. at a really, really super busy public course. And the golf course superintendent there took another job not long after I'd been there. And the director of golf operations said, "Do you want the job?" And I said, "Yeah." And I was 22, 21.
So you're a 21-year-old golf course superintendent.
Yeah.
And what year is this?
So 86.
Okay.
In that neighborhood.
Yeah.
And and South Suburban Golf Course was busy, Joel. Like, it was Denver's, like, that place never shut down. It was the place that that the guys were lined up at 4 a.m. at the gate to get in, to wait for a tee time kind of thing. It was nuts.
What an idea.
27 holes, and we were doing a bunch of renovation work there. And that's why I got hired to be the assistant, is because I had a construction background. They loved that, right?
There you go.
And so, well, okay, so we're doing this renovation deal. They're moving one of the major roads next to the golf course, so we had to change some holes around. They're building a new bridge, some different stuff like that. And I just took it all in stride. It's like long days, no problem.
So how many golf course superintendent jobs under your belt?
I had 3 super jobs before I started consulting.
Okay. And so you went from Colorado up to California.
Yeah, I did.
Went up to Grass Valley.
I did another grow-in up near Boulder, Colorado, in a place called Louisville, Colorado.
Oh, okay.
And I did it Kozak style. I did it with just a few guys and
learned it the hard way.
I took a job that had been kind of messed up, that the city was trying to manage, and I walked in there and sort of, just threw the Kozak thing at it, and I
built it.
I hired some University of Colorado rugby players, guys and girls. They were my crew. Taught them everything. Nobody on my crew had any greenkeeping experience except for my assistant.
Yeah.
And we finished all the greens, planted everything, did all that. And then Kozak calls and says, "You're going to get a call from a guy that I met in Arizona who's the golf pro at a place in Northern California. And when that guy calls, answer his phone call."
That's good advice.
He says he's at the foot of Donner Pass near Sacramento, and you should talk to this guy. And the next day I got that phone call. It was the golf pro, from this private club in Northern California. And I think it was February in Denver, and it was about 20 degrees below zero.
Right.
And they wanted to fly me out for an interview because they'd heard all about me about Mike Kozak.
Yeah,
right? That's how influential this guy is. I mean, he really downplayed it. Mike has done so much for
that's why I wanted him on. I mean, he was a mentor to so many people. And it's funny because after that, I think I told you this yesterday, but after that interview we had with Mike, I got a bunch of calls from guys. Well, you should have talked about him. You should, all these guys coming out of the woodwork that Mike influenced. And
he was influential with managers and golf pros, and everybody that Mike met loved Mike.
Yeah.
His degree of honesty and his speech and his no bullshit deal and his ability to get things done was legendary.
Yeah. Very unpretentious.
Very unpretentious, and never spouting about himself, And so this is a natural thing, right? A golf pro who met Mike one day in Arizona, who's now at his first head pros job. The super there took a job in Monterey, and the guy had been there a while, and he knew enough that he couldn't figure out who to hire. I should call Mike Kozak, right?
That's a good person to call. And
Mike says, and he said something about doing some restoration on this Billy Bell golf course. And Mike said, "Well, one of my aces just finished a grow-in. I don't know if he wants to stay there or not. I don't know what he wants to do. You should call him," right?
There you go.
So I get this phone call and I fly out there, and it's a nice day. We play golf, that afternoon. It was 20 below zero when I get on the plane in Denver, and then with my golf clubs.
Right.
And we play golf that afternoon with, like the club president, the pro. I kind of have an interview. I mean, it wasn't much of an interview because they're like, this guy's here, and and they make me an offer right on the spot.
Did you let them beat you? I hope.
Oh, hell yeah. Oh, I'm not a super great golfer, so that's not a problem. But
Okay.
but we had an enjoyable afternoon, and I
Yeah,
wasn't taking it very seriously. I was like, well, I don't know what I'm doing here, you know, and I didn't know anything. We had never been in the whole private club arena,
yeah, yeah.
right? So I didn't know that much about that. And but one of the things I said to those guys in that time period, because they were talking to me about growing grass and stuff, and I said, well, it seems like to me, because I had maybe done a little research about the weather in this place, and it was kind of one of those kind of above the fog, below the snow, foothills,
Oh, is that
you know,
high?
kind of deal, and it seemed like a bit of the transition zone. And we get on the golf course, and there's some Bermuda grass growing there, but not a lot, and none of it's any good.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
There was Bermuda grass that
There
high?
was some Bermuda. Well, it's not
Yeah.
that high. It was like 1,800 feet,
Oh,
1,500
okay.
feet.
I'm picturing it much higher. Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, and it's like okay, this is the transition zone. I mean, this looks like, I don't know, Cincinnati, or I don't know. I just was thinking transition zone. And I called Armin Sooney and I said, Armin, what do I got to know about the transition zone? And he gave me a couple of tips, and I said to those guys, I said, this seems like the perfect place to run a really good, like, kind of back to the basics kind of agronomy program, and what, like, the superintendent who was there was part of the interview thing, because he hadn't taken his new job yet, right? Manny Souza, great guy.
So really? Manny, okay. Oh,
So Manny takes me out on the golf course. Before we went and played golf, Manny didn't play golf with us, but he takes me in the shop, and he had a chemical storage building, and it was just packed with chemical. And I was like, I don't understand, And I said, do you spray a lot? Oh yeah, I spray every week, And he kind of shows me his deal, and it looks pretty. And I'm like, are you under a lot of disease pressure? And he's like, well, we've had some, but I just don't take any chances.
Right.
And I thought, well, I don't know. It just didn't feel right. None of it felt right. What he, I didn't want to be, I didn't want to be critical of the guy.
Of course not.
But I'm asking him about fertilizers and stuff, and he doesn't know anything about it. He doesn't know anything about all the things that we talk about, Joel.
Yeah. Was he soil testing?
No, he had a couple of soil tests from, at the time the Scots guys were doing soil tests for everybody. I asked him about that.
Yeah.
And I had met, I guess I should back up a little bit. I had met Dick Basala.
That was my next question, is where did you get into that world?
A couple of superintendents in Denver and I were having drinks at a bar one night, and these guys started talking about their soils guy.
He's the soils guy.
And it was a guy named Gary Grandstaff, and Gary had a long history with Dick,
Yep.
And he said, well, the next time Dick comes to town, we'll have to have you meet him, So he's at Gary was at Valley Country Club. It was not far from my place. And I drive down there. He says, Dick is here, come meet him. So I drive down there and I meet the soils guy, right?
Yeah.
And he gives us a lecture on the chalkboard. And I have no idea what this guy's talking about, but he's sure as hell smarter than me.
Yeah.
But one of the things
that's all you need to know is he's smarter than me, and I can follow him.
Well, but the chemistry was right. Like, I knew enough chemistry. I knew what he was talking about was right. But the other thing that he was saying is that, he was talking about things like energy and growth, and maximizing your growth potential. Like, he was the very first guy I heard he said the words growth potential, way before all these eggheads were doing charts and graphs over it.
What year is this, Dave? Where are we now chronologically?
88.
Okay,
88.
so we're in the late 80s now. This is about the time we're coming into the world and starting to see some of this. But so you're having this conversation with Dick.
So I meet Dick, and then so what happened is, from that grow-in that I was doing, right? Because I was in the middle of the grow-in near Boulder. Dick didn't have time in his schedule or couldn't come see the golf course, but he told me that if I brought him some samples, so I met him at the airport with a handful of samples.
Really?
And he packed them in his bag. And a couple weeks later, I get this, I get some reports, and I get a handwritten thing, and it says, do this, do that, and I called him up, and we had this little kind of phone conversation. And I'm like, wow, Dick, this is really different than everything I learned in school and all that sort of stuff. And he said, yeah, but if you do it the way I said, you're going to save a lot of money, and you're not going to, your nitrogen's not going to just flash. And,
Your life is going to be easier. Soils are going to be more sustainable.
One of those recommendations, Joel, was to find a good compost.
Really? Good for Dick.
And Dick had been working with enough guys in Denver that he knew where the minerals and where the good compost was and stuff. And he said, call Stan Metzger at Country Club of Colorado. Stan knows where to get. He knows where to get lime, and he knows where to get compost.
Where did he want you to put the compost?
He wanted me to mix lime and compost together and put it on the golf course.
On the fairways, on the whole property?
Yeah, on the whole property.
Greens, tees, everything.
Well, greens were USJ greens, was a little different.
You're doing something different, yeah. But certainly on the core of the property.
But he told me those soils would never kind of do what they needed to do if I didn't kind of put some, and he said instead
put some life into the soil. Is that what you're trying to say?
Remember what he wrote, right?
Yeah.
Because I had told him that I was putting out, I was buying a urea and ammonium sulfate blend, straight nitrogen.
Yeah. Which is what we all were taught back in those days.
Yeah, and I was putting that out 150 pounds per acre or whatever of that mix, almost, just to, in Colorado, you had to maximize growth, right? Blam.
Yeah,
right.
Cool.
I just wanted
to.
So urea and ammonium sulfate, hit it hard, get the grass out of the ground. This is the move. And Dick's whole thing was, if you put the compost and the lime out, you can reduce your nitrogen input by half.
Did you believe that?
And get a better response.
When he said that to you, did you believe that?
Yes, because I'll tell you why I believe that. Because that was exactly what the guys who grew Timothy hay in the mountains of Colorado did.
Oh, there you go. Okay, back to the range.
They would compost their manure. They would mix it with mineral. I didn't know what mineral they were mixing it with.
Probably limestone, probably calcium, right?
Yeah, they were buying some calcium. As it turns out, they were buying some dolomite.
There you go. Needed some magnesium.
Mixing that with their cow manure, composting that, spreading that cow manure in the early season, putting a little bit of nitrogen across the top of it, and that was Timothy hay.
So Dick Pasala taught you the basic principles of biological soil management back in the late 80s. I did not know that of you or of Dick, for that matter, which is great.
He did, and the thing about it is that Dick made sense. He spoke like an Amish guy.
Right.
He spoke like all those ranchers that I grew up with.
Yeah, I can see that.
You know what I'm saying? So
I have the utmost respect for Dick. It's funny you say that, because you're one of the few people that I know well that knew Jerry Brunetti fairly well. And it was the same situation for me. I come in as this young kid trying to talk about this company and biological soil management. And I'm just blindly following a gentleman who I have great faith in and was learning from. And, we would go out and do these things, and he would say it would do this, this, and this. And I'm like, I hope it does, because I got my hat hung on this thing. And sure enough, I'm sure much like the results you're probably about to talk about, what you saw from what Dick gave you.
What I saw in the turf grass and the horticulture world at that time, Joel, was almost a denial that we were in agriculture.
Yeah, exactly. And there's still a lot of that going on, as you know.
There's a ton of it going on.
Yeah, I mean,
it's just one of those people that said, Dick Pasala said, listen, this is agriculture, and the rules are kind of the rules.
Yeah, well, soils are soils. There's it's how a soil works.
Remember Mike said to you, he said, he looked across the fence and saw, the grass is growing really well.
Yeah.
And said, I can figure this out.
Right.
That was, some of that was, it was that kind of conversation. It's like, hey, are we really doing the right thing here? Yeah. And we talked about that when I worked with Mike in Southern Colorado. I was, I knew all those forage grasses, right? So I'm like, look at these grasses. This is growing, that's growing, this is not growing. We just talked about that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
We didn't know how to translate it into turf grass. Dick was the guy that translated into turf grass stock, and he said to me, we can't deny agriculture. We can't deny biology.
Actually, yeah.
We can't deny the food chain. He was always talking about the food chain.
Yeah.
Right. And and he's like, we have to look at the microbes before we can talk about what's producing,
right,
out of that. and we have to feed that system, and carbon is the food. I mean, he said all those things, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, okay.
Let's move a little bit faster along, Dave, because we're going to run out of time, and I want to get to a couple questions, and that's good. I mean, it's like I said, we're gonna do this a handful of times because there's so much that we can talk about. But so you're now a Brookside consultant, but you're now also talking this heresy. And you and I have been down this road of base saturation. You know my whole stories. You and I have reminisced over this over the years, over a number of glasses of wine or beers. And but you're now out there as a consultant, and you have been one of the predominant consultants in the golf course industry for years. And I would encourage anybody listening to give Dave Wilber a call, because he is one of the masters of all this, and he's taught me a lot. But you and I have gone back and forth on this base saturation thing so many times, and I've been beat up, fired from Rutgers. I mean, all the things that, and we're still to this day you're reading the articles of academia saying, oh, that's not provable, you can't prove that. And it's some of the most basic and simple things. But tell me your take on this argument that we've been pummeled by for so long.
I mean, you've been passionate about and fought the war.
I have,
a little differently than I have, and that's some of that is personality, and some of that is exposure, and I get all that. My thing was, I hung my shingle in 1992.
Yeah,
right.
That's when you became a Brookside consultant.
That's when Dick offered me the opportunity to get involved with the lab. And Dick said to me, he said, you'd be really good at this. And at that time, you had to take a psychological evaluation.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And it was
to be a consultant.
It was called the Curitin test. And the psych evaluation was basically, are you an independent thinker? Can you think? It wasn't about, turf grass and stuff or soils or base saturation or any of that. It was, are you kind of a rebel, or whatever? And Dick sends me this thing and I fill it out, and it was like, what am I, 25, 24, something like that. And I'm like, I've never had any therapy or, looked inside or done any of that shit. And it's like,
ridiculous, right?
How do you feel about blah, 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 fuck, man, I don't know.
I'm a kid.
Golf course superintendent,
Right.
And so Dick, I send this thing back in, and because there was I can't really talk about it too much because there's some non-disclosure stuff, and I'm not here to promote Brookside Labs, because at the end of the day, they screwed me. And I don't love that. But that's a whole nother story, and I'm not going to tell it. I'm just not, out of respect to Dick.
Okay, good.
And,
let's not.
Just to go back to that is that I wanted to work all over. I wanted to work all over the world. And they had this kind of idea that, you have an area, and you stay in it. And that was never going to be me. So we were destined for some tough stuff there anyway.
A little headbanging. But the science was there, but the concepts were all there.
The concepts were there. So anyway, I passed this test. This Dr. Curitin writes a little report about me, and he says, Dave is a young guy. He doesn't have a deep amount of, spiritual development. He's learning about the world, but he's very, very independent, and he's obviously very smart, and he's good with the written word, and this guy will fit into the organization. So I got invited in, and then I had to go through a bunch of other stuff to kind of do all that. And I was excited, man. I was like, hey. And the thing is that people were, so I was running a chemical-free program in Northern California before anybody was talking about that.
Yeah.
That whole room full of chemicals that, that the previous superintendent had, we didn't touch any of that.
Oh, there you go.
I sold most of it to other golf courses or gave it away because it had been there too long. We just stopped all that. The guy who was my assistant, Hispanic guy who'd been there forever, was like, Dave, Mr. Dave, we got to spray. And I'm like, yeah, Raul, we're not going to spray until we have an issue.
So we need to.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
And he was just sweating, his upper lip was just sweating. I've told this story a bunch in podcasts and stuff. And I'm like, Raul, listen, if you see any disease, he called it the silver dollar spot. We get the silver dollar spot,
The silver dollar.
The silver dollar spot. And I'm like, okay. And I said, Raul, if you see any silver dollar spot, you find me 24/7.
Yeah.
Right? Like the first second that you see silver,
call me right away.
That poor fucker spent an entire summer on his hands and knees every day looking for silver dollar spot. It was great. He was the ultimate scout.
Perfect. That's what you
I
need.
mean, every green, every tee, every day is what I told him, and he was that guy twice a day.
Yeah.
And we never had any disease problem.
So let's talk about your mentoring, because you have a laundry list of guys that I know well that you have mentored into this crazy world of how a soil really works. And
well,
I think you've mentored a lot of people.
So you asked the base saturation thing or whatever, and so there is a quote unquote Brookside soil philosophy.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
It's based on work.
Albrecht.
It's based on work that William Albrecht did. Dick gave me all the books. He handed me a copy of the Acres USA primer. I went on to get everything else I could get, from that organization, and also from Hay House publishers, and everybody that was doing everything in that world. And I started to meet those people. I started to meet various consultants, and there was a guy named Bob Canasano who lived in the community that I lived in. Amigo Bob, all the ranchers called him, and the guy was brilliant with trees, and there were a lot of fruit trees in that area. There were a lot of olives and pears, and in fact, the little town next to where I lived was Peardale, California.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's pretty.
And there's a lot of stone fruit, and then lower elevation there was a ton of peaches, and Bob was well versed in all that sort of stuff. And I met him at a sustainable ag thing, and it's like I just wanted to talk to this guy. And of course, it was really hard because you're a golf guy, you're not feeding the world. The fuck you want to, you're not a sustainable ag guy.
What we do.
Yeah, you guys are using up all the water for the rich people.
Right. That was the battle I always had with Jerry. It was, he was so brilliant with the soils piece, but when he got into our world, it wasn't comfortable for him at all. And so
there was a lot of,
we had to find a way.
But I started to source, and find the people that were building compost, and find I just wanted to find who was, Peaceful Valley Farm Supply was in that community.
Right there, yeah, right up the road, yeah.
Bob Canasano started Peaceful Valley Farm Supply before he went to Complete Consulting. So and so what I was doing essentially, Joel, is I was just going out and I was talking with golf course superintendents about the things that I was passionate about in that world of sustainable agriculture. And my whole spiel was about it was partially about money. Although the thing is, and I picked up on this early on, I saw very few superintendents that ever got canned for spending too much money.
Right, that's true.
And really, if you look at it, how many people have you, other than construction project or a failed renovation or whatever, as far as just day in and day out, how
pushing their budget never got them kicked out.
Yeah. If the
yelled at maybe, but never kicked out.
Right. If the product's good, if the product's
good, yeah.
Yeah. You know what I'm saying? So
number one rule, just make sure the product works.
Right. And so I thought, the conversation isn't necessarily about money. And I think that's what blows my mind, I think, about all this controversy, the minimalism kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah,
because
exactly.
I've always been a minimalist.
Of course. That's the whole idea of biological soil management. You can reduce, like what did Mike Kozak say? Kozak say to you right away is that, Dick Basala, get the compost in there and you're going to cut your budgets.
And cut your nitrogen use in half.
Exactly, in half. And not damage your soil, not destroy the soil, burn it all out.
And we had some real successes. One of my first consulting gigs, non-golf consulting gigs, was with the Oakland A's with Mark Rasm.
Oh, really? Oh, I didn't know that.
Somebody introduced me to Mark, and I went out and I spent some time with Mark. And look, I'm not a baseball field guy, but it's turf grass, right?
It's all grass. It's all soil.
Consulting is about listening.
Yeah.
I'm a good talker, but consulting is also about asking the right questions and picking up the right info. Yeah. And I listened to Mark talk about how he wanted his field to be and what his pressures were color-wise and all that sort of stuff. And I think in 92, 93, the A's were pretty, Jose Canseco, Dennis Eckersley, they were in their heyday. And Mark, was under a lot of pressure to look good. So we took a look at his spray program, and he was using a boatload of iron like most sports turf guys.
Right.
Right. And I said, Mark, here's what I see. I think if you could take and put some carbon around this and kind of make your own chelation and add some manganese to your iron, every time you spray iron, I think you should spray some manganese, that you'll get a lot more lasting kind of thing out of this.
Yeah, or just spray the manganese and kick the iron out.
Well, and you know, and I said it kind of in like it wasn't in passing, but it was just a very casual kind of thing. Well, he picked up on that.
Yeah.
And he called me up a couple days later and he says, so what would I do? And I said, well, you know, and that was the start of the famous Wilber blend.
Oh, there you go.
Which was the 4 ounces of iron, 3 ounces of manganese, 2 ounces of zinc, an ounce of boron, an ounce of humic acid, and possibly some other carbon source.
Yeah, get some carbon in
there. And essentially that's what he built, and that's what he started to spray at the Oakland Coliseum. And his lasting color, you know, he could get 2 weeks out of a spray instead of 1, Joel.
Yeah. And better rooting and better recovery.
Yeah. And he was like, wow, this looks good. And then we added a little potash to that to stand up the plant.
There you go.
You know, a little. And he's like, Wilber, you're a genius. And I'm like, not really. This isn't that hard.
Basic. Yeah. I mean, it's really agronomy 101 if you think about it, right?
Well,
Dave, let me ask you this. You've worked with a lot of different guys. You must have come up and consulted with a lot of guys that, you know, when you walk in as Dave Wilber and with this very strong philosophy, you must have walked into a number of places where they just looked at you like you got 6 eyes. How do you go about mentoring a young guy who may not at all subscribe to this hocus pocus that we all talk about, and give me not necessarily give me any names, but walk me through, you know, a situation where you really had to go up against conventional thinking and you were able to mentor somebody into a place where they could really be successful.
I'm not gonna say who this is, okay?
Please don't.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. But a guy in the desert in Arizona.
It's not Kevin Hicks, is it?
It's not.
All right, good. As long as it's not Kevin Hicks, that's good.
It was one of Kevin's neighbors. Kevin was.
That's all right. We don't need names.
Down the road. I'm not going to say anymore.
That's fine.
And everybody told me I needed to meet this guy when I was in town. You know, you should talk to him. He's an ace.
Yeah.
And I went, okay, cool. So I got his phone number and I called him up and hey, I'm Dave Wilber, and he'd heard of me, and I said, you know, I'm in town. I just would love to see your golf course. And I really wanted to see the golf course. You know, it was one of those masterpiece kind of places, and I wanted to see it. So I go over, and he's loaded for bear, right? I'm not. I'm casual about this. And he's like, you know, I want to tell you all this shit that you've been talking about you're full of shit.
He just comes right out with that. You just punches you in the head.
It doesn't work in the desert.
Okay, of course. It doesn't work here. It doesn't work here.
It works in the desert.
It can't work here.
I've been growing grass here for a long time, and this is bullshit. What the stuff that you're talking about is bullshit, right? And I you know, what am I going to do? I mean, I'm young, and this is my living. This is my business. This is how I eat. And I said, well, I looked at him and I said, you know, if it's bullshit, there's a lot of people that are doing pretty good with the bullshit, you know? And he hammered me, Joel. And he said, you sound like everybody else. This guy down the road's using this product. That guy down the road's using this product. You know, bullshit. Like, I care about the results right here. Sorry about my language, but this is
all right. Well, we're not on the network.
Superintendent talk like this, right?
Yeah,
and so,
exactly.
And I want to, you know, and I'm like, okay, well, all right. And I'm like, look, I'm not here to battle with you. You know, I want to see the golf course. Let's go. And we jump on a cart and we go, and the place is great. And I'm enjoying myself because I'm enjoying seeing a really good program in action. I'm enjoying seeing a well-oiled staff in action. You know, I'm a golf course superintendent.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm looking at the details. I'm looking at the stuff that, you know, that a lot of people don't see. And I see a very well-polished organization.
Yeah, exactly.
You know? So
good superintendent.
The only thing I could think to, a great superintendent, and the only thing I can think to do is say, what is your problem? Like, do you have a problem green? Because every golf course has that green.
What keeps you up at night?
It's the first green that you go look at when the hair's standing.
Yeah, exactly. Come here, let's look at this one. It's keeping me up at night.
And then there's that green that you know is going to be good no matter what.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Always
so
is.
I said, so which green is this and which green, which is your very, very best green and which is, and he kind of talked about that. And I said, all right, would you allow me to take a soil sample from your worst green and from your best green? And this will be on my dime.
Perfect.
Okay. And I just want to see, I'm just curious, what's going on. Right. And he just kind of goes, well, whatever, you can soil test all you want. Soil tests don't mean shit.
Right.
That's what he said. Soil tests don't mean shit. And I said, okay, well, let me just do this. And I get the results back and I call him up. I think, I faxed him, the results. And I said, let's talk about this. Right. And there were some really stark differences.
So the numbers did show up.
It did.
Yeah.
And it doesn't always, right? So
it doesn't always. You're right.
It doesn't always.
Sometimes it's actually reversed, but usually it's consistent.
It can be. And I was like, okay. And of course, if you don't know what you're looking at in the first place, like I'm looking at things that other people are not necessarily looking
at. Right, exactly.
And on a good soil audit, there's no charts and graphs for a reason. Dr. Albrecht always said that charts and graphs are
Thank you for that.
Right?
Yeah. Oh, I agree. I'm dead on that. So what did you see? What was the bad?
I just saw that the green, that was struggling was a little bit out of calcium and it was out of some other nutrient and it was dramatically out of phosphorus.
Yeah. There you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the other one was, was rolling some phosphorus and looked a little bit better. And I just said, okay, why don't we, if I gave you 3 things to do to this bad grain, would you do them? Well, it depends on what it is. I said, okay,
right, exactly.
Well, I want to put out a little bit of phosphorus and I want to give you a little spray blend, to put out. And I know that's hard on one green or whatever, but let's figure something out.
Play with it.
Right. And he was,
what do you got to lose?
At this point, he's curious. He's like, okay, Wilbur, and the other thing is, I guess we pulled a sample from a fairway and I said something to him about there being some, potential issues with a way to, break up his compaction a little bit,
right.
That it seemed like this was too compact and maybe that's why there was some crabgrass stuff going on or whatever. And I hit a bell there. I rung a bell of some sort with him.
That's what it takes. That little one thing.
So I got him to get some Link 44, some 1034O liquid,
mm-hmm.
and spray that on this green, right? A phos acid type, suspension with some nitrogen, and the green went from being his problem child to being a really, really good green in a very short amount of time. And
so you did your trace package with some carbon, you did some limestone or some calcium at any rate.
We floated a little bit of calcium in that mix and he, here, do this. And he makes about 3 applications and he calls me up and he says, son of a bitch, Wilbur.
Yeah. What's going on here?
What did you discover? And of course, at this point, I'm a little salty and I'm like, well, I thought you said this didn't work.
Yeah.
Everything I said didn't work. And he's like, and I said, hey, look, our agreement was that I would kind of do this and you would kind of do that. And now we have to talk business, a little bit.
Right. There you go. We all have those stories and they're the best stories in the industry. And, it's when the light bulb goes off and even when I was teaching at Rutgers, I remember looking across a field of 40 guys and all of a sudden the light bulbs would go off. It'd be like popcorn popping and you'd see the kernels going and then you realize, oh, okay, something clicked in. And of course there was always a few kernels that never popped. And
sure.
As I like to say in my meetings, those guys became general managers, but that's just a stupid joke.
It was funny. One of the things that guy said to me is he said, that spray costs, and he was one of these guys that knew what everything costs per acre.
Yeah, good.
Right. And he says that spray costs X number, whatever it was per acre. And the other stuff I've been buying costs, 6 times that. And this is where this whole deal where I got, I have gotten in some people's face about all this because this idea that our philosophies, and I'm going to say our, because this is the stuff you and
This is our. I mean, I didn't make it up. You didn't make it up. It's how a soil works. Carbon to nitrogen ratios.
What you guys are talking about here is all about selling fertilizer.
Yeah.
And it's like, are you kidding me?
No, we sell less if we do it right.
I have been the enemy of just
Right.
about every fertilizer guy in every area that I've
Yes,
come
you have.
because these guys suddenly aren't, they're not selling any chemical. They're not selling any,
Right.
you know what I'm saying?
Oh, I know exactly what you're saying.
And I learned that lesson the hard way, Joel. I mean, to fast forward to when I became the director of agronomy for Sierra Pacific Turf Supply,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like they want me to advise some clients that normally wouldn't pay for a consultant, but these are good clients of Sierra Pacific Turf Supplies. And we do soil tests. I go out, I apply the same philosophy, and that superintendent is buying half the fertilizer that he was buying before because he's buying the right stuff. And the sales guy who has that account is mad.
Right. Dave, you're killing me. You're killing me.
Yeah, you're killing me.
That was the same thing when we started the business. I've told this story a million times with Jerry, is that, we went out and found out that, you don't need this. And we actually now, our whole philosophy is that if you go down this road of carbon-based fertility and biological soil management, you're going to reduce your inputs and we're going to sell you less. And that's what we want. Minimalization. I mean, this whole concept of minimalization is wonderful if you do the soil piece correctly. If you don't, you're basically taking half your lunch away and you're going to starve.
I think my third season at the Lake Wildwood Club, because the key there was a piece of Bermuda grass in my fairway blend that was always going to be there.
Yeah.
Right. And the thing is that you want that Bermuda grass to get going in the springtime, and you want to have that transition. And we didn't have the chemicals, and I didn't overseed heavy. I overseeded a little bit in the fall, right, just to keep some winter color. But I wanted my Bermuda grass fairways back for the summer.
Good.
And I called Dick. I think it was the spring of the third season. Now the weather was just about the same, and I kept impeccable weather records, so I knew what was going on with soil temperatures and weather. And I said the weather was the same, just about the same as last year, but my Bermuda grass is flying out of the ground. We can't keep it under control. This is before Primo, right? I'm like, Dick, what the hell is going on here?
What's happening here?
Your soils are getting good. Your biology is working.
Bringing things down.
It's killing me. I can't keep up.
Yeah.
And nothing's different. The soil temperatures, we're on the exact same.
Oh, there's a lot different, and what's different. There's a lot different. You started working your soils, right?
My grass grower world, so I got the Ladies Invitational coming up in May, and my fairways are knee deep.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And I'm like, dude, I can't afford to cut this much grass. And he goes, and so Dick's whole thing was, well, did you put that nitrogen application out that you usually do? Well, no, not really. And he says, well, then don't.
Yeah. Why would you? You don't need it.
He says, is it in the barn? Yeah, it's in the barn.
Leave it there.
Don't put it out.
Yeah.
And that particular blend that we had done sat in the shop long after I left.
Yeah. That's a great story. Dave, I hate to tell you this, but we're running out of time. And I think this is Dave Wilber 1. There'll be Dave Wilber 2, and maybe Dave Wilber a lot. But
can we just kind of put an exclamation point on this?
Please do.
This was one of the things I wanted to say today. There's two things that I kind of, first of all, this whole nonsense about base saturation versus MLSN versus this, that, or the other, SLAN,
SLAN, yeah,
is made up nonsense. I fully believe that. I think what it's done is it's given people a reason to take sides, to have a voice when they didn't have one, to make people look foolish, to make people not look whatever. I don't see it. I've never seen it that way. There are soils and there are places where we can apply the Albrecht philosophy and the base saturation thing perfectly. There are other soils that you can't.
You can't have, like low CEC soils.
I was talking about, exactly. I was talking about this desert situation.
Yeah.
We broke some rules there that were not in the book in order to look at things differently.
Yeah. A
lot of that had to do with water, and I think we're going to have some water conversations.
Yeah, you and I, or you and Kevin, maybe we'll talk about water down the road from here.
Because Kevin and I were talking about water the other day.
Yeah.
In a situation, and it's such a big input, and in so many places, water quality has gotten worse. It's not getting better.
Yeah. Yeah, it has absolutely gotten worse. There's no question, and it's one of those pieces of the puzzle that too many of us, including our team. I mean, I would be the first to tell you, I'm not a great. I mean, we're gonna ask you to come into our office and teach us a little bit about water. But that's one of those things that too many people really don't have a great handle on. And I think we can help people understand water better. It'll make their lives a lot easier.
I think it makes a big difference in the
No
thing.
question.
And there's no question that we have to sometimes change the rules, and there are no hard and fast rules. And this whole
Exactly. Thank you.
thing does not always apply. And that's not me being an apologist or saying, oh, well, it doesn't really work. That's none of that. It's this is agronomy. This is nature.
101.
Yeah. So that's the first thing. The second thing that I wanted to make sure that we talked about today is, I know there's a lot of people, and I know even though with COVID and everything, I mean, I'm still, I do consulting now, over the phone, and which we did a lot of anyway, but then Zoom and FaceTime and all that sort of stuff. And there's still a lot of people doing some renovation restoration work.
Yes, there is. We're grateful for that, actually.
I'm always so startled. Like anytime we expose some soil,
yeah.
With a dozer, with a sod cutter or whatever, I want to be doing some work to that soil.
Absolutely.
I'm still shocked at the number of guys that will call me guys and girls. I'm sorry. I'm very bad at this.
That's all right. We all are. We're getting there.
But I've had, I have those kind of conversations where I say, oh, that's, because everybody wants to talk to me about construction because it's a big part of what I do.
Yeah.
Right. We talk about how to work with.
We will do a construction conversation straight out one day too.
How to work with your architect and all that. But I just want to get to this is like this idea, and I just want to plant this with you and with, with people that are listening, because it's so big in my heart right now, is that anytime we expose some soil, we want to be doing some work to that soil.
Yeah. Amend it. Feed it.
Amend it.
Build a mineral base. Get some carbon.
It's a get 5 years worth of work done.
Yeah.
In a month kind of situation. What we have to do in a no-till situation through the turf.
Yeah.
We can up that times 5 anytime we have a chance to, to do it on exposed soil with some tillage, all that.
Exactly.
Stuff. And even these, kind of gas and regrass, where we're not doing the whole USGA green thing, but we're taking this, we're phrase mowing the surface.
Even more reason.
There's tons of work to do with that stuff. And so I hope people listening to this today will access you guys, will access us and all of that, because it's such a big piece of the puzzle. And we have, we have made huge differences in people in that, because it comes about time, right? Whether you're seeding that or laying sod back on it or whatever. Time is everything.
Time is everything. Yeah, that's one of the lessons we've learned the best, is that by doing the right things, you do buy time. Dave, let me, I'm going to run out of here, but I want to do one thing before I go. If somebody wanted to contact Dave Wilber, how do they find you?
DaveWilber@yahoo.com.
There you go. So, I think a lot of people think that you and I have worked together for the years, and we never have, other than peripherally. But I have to say again, as I started this conversation, you have been a true mentor to me. I have learned so much over the years. I mean, you brought me to all sorts of places that I would never have been able to get to. You introduced me to Kevin Hicks, among dozens of other guys in this industry that have been very important to me and to our company. And I am grateful for that. We are going to get you back on this call a couple of times, and we'll continue this conversation. But thank you for joining me today.
I'm here for you anytime, brother.
And again, if anybody's listening and wants to reach out to the master here on this, please do. You can find him easily, and you will learn. I can promise you that. And I want to thank everybody for listening to our podcast. We will have Dave Wilber back again, I promise, in one or many different forms, and get into some very specific things and all that. So thanks, Dave.
I have a question for you.
Go ahead.
Before you give your end spiel. Isn't it fun being a passionate person?
Well, it's all I know. So I've lived it my entire, it's funny. Somebody had asked me that, where did you learn that? Because I don't think I learned it. I mean, and that's part of what, drew me to people like you and to Jerry Brunetti, is that, those are the things that make bonds, and when you meet somebody like, you and I met and immediately bonded, and I met Jerry Brunetti and immediately bonded. And, and I think part of that, Dave, at least for me, is that I find myself interested in in meeting people that I can learn from. And, obviously Jerry was, I mean, I spent 30 years working with the man, and to the last day I was learning things, which always pissed me off. And I feel much the same with you, is that I could spend time talking to you, and still, after, how long have we known each other? 25 years. I can still learn something from you, which is really what it's all about. I mean, just keep growing. Keep growing, my brother.
I love
so
that.
anyway, thank you so much, Dave. We will be back next week with another Earthworks podcast. And if you need anything from Mr. Wilber, please reach out to him. And again, Dave, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Joel. Take care, brother.